Hello friends, through this video we will learn about the ecological cycles. 1. Hydrological cycle. Hydrological cycle. The water that humans use today has been around for hundreds of millions of years, and the amount available probably has not changed very much. Water moves around the world, changes forms, is taken in by plants and animals, but never really disappears. It travels in a large continuous cycle called the hydrological cycle. The hydrologic cycle is the transfer of water from the oceans to the atmosphere to the land and back to the oceans in a system involving a number of major processes. Water evaporates from the oceans and the surface. Water vapor is transported and lifted in the atmosphere until it condenses and precipitates. Precipitated water may be intercepted by vegetation. Infiltrates into the ground and later percolates and recharges groundwater. Flows through the soil as subsurface flow. Discharges into streams as surface runoff. A flow chart of the hydrologic cycle. Water moves by processes like evaporation, condensation, precipitation, runoff, infiltration, sublimation, transpiration, melting, and groundwater flow. These processes control the distribution and movement of water in Earth. This in turn is determined by the weather patterns and by physical factors such as topography, geology, and vegetation. Vegetation cover, for example, can reduce the rate of direct evaporation of water from the soil, but at the same time will result in the loss of water to the atmosphere by transpiration. Land cover and soil type will largely affect the runoff. So, as we have more impervious surfaces, then we will have more runoff and less infiltration and indeed less recharge to groundwater resources. Carbon cycle. Carbon cycle. Carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is the biogeochemical cycle by which carbon is exchanged among the biosphere, pedosphere, outermost surface of Earth, hydrosphere, and atmosphere of the Earth. It is one of the most important cycles of the Earth and allows for the most abundant element to be recycled and reused throughout the biosphere and all of its organisms. The carbon cycle is usually thought of as four major reservoirs of carbon interconnected by pathways of exchange. These reservoirs are the atmosphere, the terrestrial biosphere, which is usually defined to include fresh water systems and non-living organic material, such as soil carbon. The oceans, including dissolved inorganic carbon and living and non-living marine biota. The sediments including fossil fuels. Carbon cycle. Carbon is released into the atmosphere in several ways. Through the respiration performed by plants and animals. This is an exothermic reaction and it involves the breaking down of glucose, or other organic molecules, into carbon dioxide and water. Through the decay of animal and plant matter. Fungi and bacteria break down the carbon compounds in dead animals and plants and convert the carbon to carbon dioxide if oxygen is present, or methane if not. Through combustion of organic material which oxidizes the carbon it contains, producing carbon dioxide, and other things, like water vapor. Burning fossil fuels such as coal, petroleum products, and natural gas releases carbon that has been stored in the geosphere for millions of years. Burning agrofuels also releases carbon dioxide. Carbon cycle. Production of cement. Carbon dioxide is released when limestone, calcium carbonate, is heated to produce lime, calcium oxide, a component of cement. At the surface of the oceans where the water becomes warmer, dissolved carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere. Volcanic eruptions and metamorphism release gases into the atmosphere. Volcanic gases are primarily water vapor, carbon dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. The carbon dioxide released is roughly equal to the amount removed by silicate weathering, so the two processes, which are the chemical reverse of each other, sum to roughly zero, and do not affect the level of atmospheric carbon dioxide on time scales of less than about 100,000 years. Carbon cycle. Carbon is transferred within the biosphere as heterotrophs feed on other organisms or their parts, e.g., fruits. This includes the uptake of dead organic material, detritus, by fungi and bacteria for fermentation or decay. Most carbon leaves the biosphere through respiration. When oxygen is present, aerobic respiration occurs, which releases carbon dioxide into the surrounding air or water, following the reaction C6H12O6 plus 6O2 6CO2 plus 6H2O. Otherwise, anaerobic respiration occurs and releases methane into the surrounding environment, which eventually makes its way into the atmosphere or hydrosphere, e.g., as marsh gas. Carbon cycle. Burning of biomass, e.g. forest fires, wood used for heating, anything else organic, can also transfer substantial amounts of carbon to the atmosphere. Carbon may also be circulated within the biosphere when dead organic matter, such as peat, becomes incorporated in the geosphere. Animal shells of calcium carbonate, in particular, may eventually become limestone through the process of sedimentation. Oxygen cycle. The oxygen cycle is the biogeochemical cycle that describes the movement of oxygen within and between its three main reservoirs, the atmosphere, air, the biosphere, living things, and the lithosphere, Earth's crust. The main driving factor of the oxygen cycle is photosynthesis, which is responsible for the modern Earth's atmosphere and life. Oxygen cycle. Oxygen cycle. By far the largest reservoir of Earth's oxygen is within the silicate and oxide minerals of the crust and mantle, 99.5%. Only a small portion has been released as free oxygen to the biosphere, 0.01%, and atmosphere, 0.36%. The main source of atmospheric oxygen is photosynthesis, which produces sugars and oxygen from carbon dioxide and water. 6CO2 plus 6H2O and energy C6H12O6 plus 6O2. An additional source of atmospheric oxygen comes from photolysis, whereby high-energy ultraviolet radiation breaks down atmospheric water and nitrite into component atoms. The free H and N atoms escape into space, leaving O2 in the atmosphere. 2H2O and energy 4H plus O2. 2N2O and energy 4N plus O2. The main way oxygen is lost from the atmosphere is via respiration and decay, mechanisms in which animal life and bacteria consume oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Because lithospheric minerals are oxidized in oxygen, chemical weathering of exposed rocks also consumes oxygen. An example of surface weathering chemistry is formation of iron oxides, rust. 4FeO plus O2 2Fe2O3. Oxygen is also cycled between the biosphere and lithosphere. Marine organisms in the biosphere create calcium carbonate shell material, CaCO3, that is rich in oxygen. When the organism dies, its shell is deposited on the shallow seafloor and buried over time to create the limestone rock of the lithosphere. Weathering processes initiated by organisms can also free oxygen from the lithosphere. Plants and animals extract nutrient minerals from rocks and release oxygen in the process. The presence of atmospheric oxygen has led to the formation of ozone, O3, and the ozone layer within the stratosphere. The ozone layer is extremely important to modern life as it absorbs harmful ultraviolet radiation. O2 plus UV energy 2O. O plus O2 O3. Oxygen cycle. Almost all living things need oxygen. They use this oxygen during the process of creating energy in living cells. Just as water moves from the sky to the earth and back in the hydrologic cycle, oxygen is also cycled through the environment. Plants mark the beginning of the oxygen cycle. Plants are able to use the energy of sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates and oxygen in a process called photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide produced during respiration is breathed out by animals into the air. So oxygen is created in plants and used up by animals, as is shown in the picture above. But the oxygen cycle is not actually quite that simple. Plants must break carbohydrates down into energy just as animals do. During the day, plants hold onto a bit of the oxygen which they produced in photosynthesis and use that oxygen to break down carbohydrates. But in order to maintain their metabolism and continue respiration at night, the plants must absorb oxygen from the air and give off carbon dioxide just as animals do. Even though plants produce approximately 10 times as much oxygen during the day as they consume at night, the nighttime consumption of oxygen by plants can create low oxygen conditions in some water habitats. Oxygen in water is known as dissolved oxygen or dew. In nature, oxygen enters water when water runs over rocks and creates tremendous amounts of surface area. The high surface area allows oxygen to transfer from the air into the water very quickly. When the water in a stream enters a pond, microorganisms in the pond begin to metabolize, break down, organic matter, consuming oxygen in the process. This is another form of oxygen cycle. Oxygen enters water in rapids and leaves water in pools. Oxygen cycle. The nitrogen cycle is the process by which nitrogen is converted between its various chemical forms. This transformation can be carried out through both biological and physical processes. Important processes in the nitrogen cycle include fixation, mineralization, nitrification, and denitrification. The majority of Earth's atmosphere, approximately 78%, is nitrogen, making it the largest pool of nitrogen. However, atmospheric nitrogen has limited availability for biological use, leading to a scarcity of usable nitrogen in many types of ecosystems. The nitrogen availability can affect the rate of key ecosystem processes, including primary production and decomposition. Human activities such as fossil fuel combustion, use of artificial nitrogen fertilizers, and release of nitrogen in wastewater have dramatically altered the global nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle. Ecological function. Nitrogen is essential for many processes. It is crucial for any life on Earth. It is a component in all amino acids, as incorporated into proteins, and is present in the bases that make up nucleic acids, such as DNA and RNA. In plants, much of the nitrogen is used in chlorophyll molecules, which are essential for photosynthesis and further growth. Although Earth's atmosphere is an abundant source of nitrogen, most is relatively unusable by plants. Chemical processing, or natural fixation, through processes such as bacterial conversion, are necessary to convert gaseous nitrogen into forms usable by living organisms, which makes nitrogen a crucial component of food production. The processes of the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is present in the environment in a wide variety of chemical forms including organic nitrogen, ammonium, NH4+, nitrite, NO2, nitrate, NO3, nitrous oxide, N2O, nitric oxide, NO, or inorganic nitrogen gas, N2. Organic nitrogen may be in the form of a living organism, humus, or in the intermediate products of organic matter decomposition. The processes of the nitrogen cycle transform nitrogen from one form to another. Many of those processes are carried out by microbes, either in their effort to harvest energy or to accumulate nitrogen in a form needed for their growth. The diagram above shows how these processes fit together to form the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is a component of proteins and nucleic acids, and so a supply of nitrogen is essential to all living things. Nitrogen is available to living things in variety of forms, the source used depending on the species. Nitrogen constitutes maximum percentage in air, as high as 79%. However, it can be utilized by plants and animals only when it gets fixed. Nitrogen fixation predominantly occurs due to biological means and to a lesser extent by physiochemical methods. The chief source of nitrogen for plants is nitrates in the soil. The atmospheric nitrogen is fixed symbiotically as well as asymbiotically by a variety of microorganisms. The chief nitrogen fixers are the bacteria found in the root nodules of legumes. Asymbiotic fixers are blue, green algae, aerobic bacteria like Azotobacter and anaerobic bacteria like Clostridium. Some proportion of atmospheric nitrogen is also fixed during lightning also. The fixed atmospheric nitrogen reaches the soil as nitrates, which are taken up by plants for manufacture of complex nitrogenous compounds, which in turn are eaten by animals. The dead organic matter formed due to the death of plants and animals is decomposed by the various types of bacteria, actinomycetes, and fungi occurring in the soil and water. This releases nitrogen either in free stage or as ammonia gas in the atmosphere. Ammonia gas may reach the soil as nitrates through bacterial activity. Some nitrates of the soil after denitrification may be converted to free nitrogen gas and returned to the atmosphere. The accumulation of nitrates in water causes eutrophication. NO2 from incomplete combustion of fossil fuels in automobiles further pollutes the environment. By fixation, nitrogen gets converted into various compounds, mainly into nitrates NO3 and ammonia. The nitrates are assimilated to form amino acids, urea, and other organic residues in the producers, consumers and decomposers. By ammonification, these amino acids and urea are converted into nitrites NO2, further into nitrates NO3, and finally these are converted into gaseous nitrogen. Thus nitrogen balance is maintained in atmosphere. Phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is the basic element involved in the metabolic processes of energy transfer during the growth of a living tissue. It is comparatively less abundant in natural ecosystems, particularly in terrestrial ecosystems, and occurs in meager amounts in aquatic ecosystems too. The phosphorus is made available to the plants from the phosphoric rocks by slow weathering processes. The phosphates are metabolized in the plant body and pass through the food chain to animals and then to decomposers in the form of organic phosphate, which is subsequently made available in the soil for reutilization through mineralization and decomposition. During precipitation, the inorganic phosphates are carried to water systems wherein they are taken up by phytoplankton and are converted into organophosphates. These organophosphates are consumed by zooplankton, which is the food for other organisms. A major proportion of phosphorus is lost through runoff to the deep sediments and in the formation of teeth and bones. Some quantities are returned back to the earth in the form of bird excreta and fishes. Sulphur cycle. Sulfur is a component of the sedimentary cycle. It is found in gaseous forms in the atmosphere and as sulfates, sulfides and organic sulfur in the soil. SO2 gas present in the atmosphere is produced volcanically, by burning of vegetation, and now in copious quantities by oxidation of sulfates and in fossil fuels. H2S and dimethyl sulfide are commonly formed by the activity of anaerobic bacteria. The organic and elemental sulfur and SO4 is formed through the oxidation of H2S, SO2, and H2S from atmosphere is returned to the soil through precipitation. Sulfur in the form of sulfates is the principal available form that is reduced and incorporated into proteins by autotrophs. In sulfur cycle, microbes play a key role. The sulfur is incorporated in the tissues of autotrophs in the proteins. It passes through the grazing food chain and excess of it is released through the animals. Within the detritus food chain, the decomposition of proteins releases sulfur. In anaerobic soils and sediments H2S is formed by sulfate-reducing bacteria. The sulfur cycle plays a key role in the metabolism of other nutrients like iron, copper, cadmium, zinc, cobalt etc. Thank you for watching the video. If you like it, please do share it and subscribe the channel.